The second video in the series. Hopefully continue with more videos about automotive security standards, in particular threat analysis, threat modeling, and risk analysis, or TARA. This is something that is gaining a lot of popularity because this is something that is being required in many markets such as Europe and Asia. And you see some car makers already have been stopped from releasing the cars in the market for not complying with the regulations related to security and other things. So in the previous video, I talked about a lot of the terminology for TARA, ISO21434. I thought this one I would provide more a visual of all these terminologies and other things, and also the fact that I'm learning to make more complex YouTube videos. So it's a journey for me. Hopefully, it's a good and enjoyable journey for you as well. Basically, most of the concepts, terminology, and things that I cover here, they're from the ISO 21434, as I mentioned. I just show this a little bit here, so that you know what I'm talking about. So this is basically the standard. And as you just go through this very quickly, just in the beginning, to show you, this is their overall um, um, their overall structure of the document. And when you hear people talk about clauses, you see that this document has numbering for everything, and in particular, they talk about the organization, cybersecurity management, and cybersecurity activities, and a lot of other things that are not covered as part of threat modeling. But this particular area, you can see the other clauses 9, 10, and 15. They're very related to threat modeling, and I'll cover this. But basically, I just wanted to show you this is the first figure in the standard. And then they talk about what each clauses cover. And the other thing that is very useful to learn and pay attention to, I covered this in the previous video, and I cover it in more details this time, is their terminology. A lot of it is awkward or not what everyone is familiar with. So it's really good to pay attention to this. But basically, this is what I'm covering in this video. And towards the end of this same document is a very lengthy document, so I'm just scrolling really fast. Hopefully that doesn't get you dizziness. But basically the idea is, if you go to the end of this document, there are a bunch of annexes, and one annex is really good, is this one, Annex 2, which shows how any one of those clauses that I mentioned earlier relate to what they call work products. And the work products are basically any type of evidence that you need to collect in terms of documentation, so that if somebody asks you if you're complying with this entire standard ISO 21434, you have to have each one of these documented in a separate document to provide to the auditor. So you can see the numbers here, and we'll get into that later, but I just wanted to show you some of these tables that are very useful. The first one with showing the overall clause numbers, and this one, the work products. Then there are a couple of also interesting interesting annexes at the end that talks about, let me just scroll down to this one talks about impact rating, and I'll cover that to some extent as well. And there's some examples as well, feasibility rating and some other examples. So let's dig into the presentation here, and I'll kind of try to minimize this and go a little bit smaller so I can give more space to these slides here. Okay, So let's start from the beginning and just what are the things that you need to focus on. And the idea here is when they talk about concept phase and product development phase and post development phases, this is really obviously the engineering process that any engineer or anybody working in an engineering environment is used to. So you start with the design, this is a concept phase, and then you move to the development phase, and this is at some point you release the product, and that's post development phase, and at some point you sort of end support for the product. And this these are work items and clauses within the security standard that show how each one of the security activities or basically actions you need to take or documents you create overlap with each stages of engineering. So for instance, in concept phase, you define items or goals and things like that. So this is just to just get the whole idea about the entire process. And I'm going to go dig deeper into especially this area and the threat analysis. But just so you know, so this is the design phase. This is what you do during the development. And this is post-development, say if it's a car or any other product is already out in the world. And this is typically something called end of cybersecurity support and decommissioning. And it's very important if you're putting cars or other products in the market that you clearly indicate to your customers or consumers that how you're ending the cybersecurity support or how you're decommissioning these activities. So these are important, but are not the focus of this particular video. So let's dig into the sort of terminology. This is again what I covered in the previous video. It's quite a soup. I feel like even for a person who has been in security for a long time, but this is trying to shed some light into that, and you can take this as a cheat sheet and then compare with the terminology and the specific sections that, as I mentioned, in the two tables. So what's an item? So an item is the first thing you start with for threat modeling is you need to do what they call item definition. And the item definition is basically item is a component or a set of component that has a function at the vehicle level, and if you're doing a vehicle threat modeling. So example would be what they call telematic or infotainment unit. That's the big display that you have next to the driver that the driver can look at. So it does many things. It does provide entertainment, audio and music and map and navigation and in case there's autonomous various things related to autonomous. So as you can imagine, there's many components there. There are chips and displays and interfaces and Bluetooth and cellular and all that stuff. So those are each the components, and the overall could be an item that provides a function. And they have a definition concept called asset. So asset is basically something that provides a value and has cybersecurity properties. So what are cybersecurity properties? In general, the concept that a lot of people are familiar with is CIA, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And I like to add access control as well. So what is confidentiality? For instance, if you're talking about the infotainment system, if you store your phone numbers in there, your contacts, or where did you go as far as navigation and all that, that's your personal information, and that should be kept confidential. So that's an asset in this case that has a property, a desired property, which is confidentiality. So if you're familiar with security concept, that means you need to encrypt things as you store them or as you send them over the wire or over the air. Integrity means you protect it from modification. So let's say if you're getting a map in your infotainment system, you're hoping that the map is correct. Or if you're getting accident information, you're hoping that that information is correct and nobody tampered with, so you can't get to work or things like that. Um, Availability is obviously pretty obvious. You want to make sure that whatever you want to use, whatever component is available for use. And access control is, nobody can access, change configurations or change your password and things like that. So moving on from item to cybersecurity, we talked about cybersecurity property. So what is the damage scenario? This is an interesting one, and something that a lot of people get confused about. This is really from user perspective, somebody who is using your product. So they say this is an adverse consequence of a malfunction to a user. So you can think about it in terms of infotainment system. If you miss your navigation, that causes problem for your operation. So operation of the vehicle, your activities, or your radio all of a sudden gets really loud. If you have watched the Jeep hack, that's what the hackers, the white hat hackers did. They made the music play really loud. Believe it or not, that can drive you crazy if you have seen that video. Or your heat doesn't work and you're somewhere right now, a lot of places in the world are frozen or sub-zero temperature, and that can be a safety issue. So these are basically the damage scenarios. If I mentioned about this in the previous video. This is something that actually requires business knowledge. So if you want to figure out what your damage scenarios are, you probably should talk to your product manager, to marketing, or people who produce the product for obviously a business reason. It's not something that you want to ask a security person, because they would tend to give you something that is not a damage scenario, but a threat scenario. And I'll talk about damage scenarios in a second, so you'll see the difference. And so when you talk about damage scenario, the thing that you need to really determine with your business people is what the impact is. Like if that malfunction happens, what's the impact? Like obviously, say your navigation system goes bad is not as bad as if your brake doesn't work or your steering doesn't follow what you want it to do. So the impact is very different. There's, whether it's safety impact or financial impact or whatnot. This is something you need to determine ahead of time. Now, moving on to threat scenario here, and so this is basically you look at your system, your items, that components, and then you see, okay, what are the ways to compromise their properties? If something needs to be kept a secret, what is a way for someone to, say, get an encryption key or listen in the wire and figure stuff out or get access to the system, things like that. So this is really usually requires security expertise, somebody who has security background, architecture, know how to get into systems. That's how you find out about your threat scenario. And typically threat scenario is obviously as a result of a vulnerability. Something has not been designed securely or not, or potential not to be handled very well by the user. That vulnerability can be exploited and cause a threat. So, like I mentioned, this requires expertise to evaluate the feasibility, how easy it is to make an attack. We'll talk about that a little bit in a second. The next thing is cybersecurity control. So this is, as the standard call, is a measure that modifies the risk. Not that it says modify. It doesn't mean that the risk is completely gone. It just means that this is a measure to eliminate something. So sorry, a measure to reduce the risk, not necessarily eliminate, but it's something you do. And typically, like example here is maybe you encrypt, or maybe you sign a message, or sign a software so nobody can tamper with, or you set a password in front of something, so people have to use the password so they can't change things. Or maybe it's a physical measure that maybe you put some tamper-proof cover. Let's say in case of autonomous cars, there are a lot of radars and lidars and cameras and stuff like that. If obviously they're exposed, somebody can take them off and put something else instead. So putting you know, a good cover that prevents people from doing these replacements is a physical measure for as a cybersecurity control. And now the cybersecurity concept, this is something that is at least strange to me. It's basically requirements. It's requirements for the items and their operational environments. And they also talk about the goals, which are, goals at the cyber concept stage. And when you go at concept stage, you're talking about, like I mentioned previously, in engineering flow, concept, production, post-production, and end of life. This is at the design stage. So goals that you set, requirements that you set as a design stage. Now, what's a claim? The claim is obviously cybersecurity claim is whatever you claim that you did about the risk. Even if you decided to keep it, you decided to, they call retain the risk. Hey, this is not a big deal, or this is something I can't fix right now for the next 2 weeks or a month, or this release, or something that I couldn't do anything about it because it what came with a software that I bought from a supplier. So these are measures: retention, sharing, or mitigating that was coming from the control. Either way, cybersecurity claims. These are claims that you make, statements that you need to write down. So if somebody did a threat analysis and they said, here are the list of threats that you have, and you need to record what decisions you made, right? So that basically the security person cannot get the blame, but there's a business person who makes the decision and says, I want to keep this risk, or I want to fix this 6 months from now. And that has all the track record needs to be there. And the cybersecurity case is the arguments and the evidence that backing up the claim. So you made a claim. Say you said, oh, I mitigated. I did a lot of work to reduce the risk. Okay, show that you had requirements for this. You changed your design. You did test validation showing that that's no longer the risk. Those has to be documented as evidence. This is a picture borrowed from the standard again. So it kind of shows the relation. Obviously, they figured out that all of their terminology is so awkward that they had to explain all of this with a picture. I'm not going to go through this, but it's something that's there in case you need to understand what the flow is. This is also borrowed for the standard. The same table at the end that I was talking about, and I kind of wanted to see. It's really awkward. I, as somebody who had decades of experience in security, and other people as well, have a hard time figuring out how to use this standard. And, in particular, okay, this is my class, this is item definition, this is cybersecurity goal, or say in this case, example, impact rating for a damage scenario. It says you have to have this product, work product 15-04, showing impact rating with associated impact categories. So you go to a specific place in the standard, you look for clause 15.5, and then you kind of follow what they're telling you. What inputs do you need to have? It says prerequisites. What are the prerequisites? Okay, you need to have damage scenarios. So you need to have listed your damage scenarios. What are the problems for the user to be figuring out what the impact is? That's pretty self-explanatory if you think about it, but the way all these work products and all that are here is so confusing. So you just follow this, okay, what prerequisite I need to do. This is, I need to have a damage scenarios. I need to have these supporting items. I have to define my items, obviously, and the assets. And then they like talk about requirements, and then what do you need to provide to auditor at the end. Work products, it's this one. So you this kind of giving you a workflow, but it's so convoluted, and the document is so dry that it's very hard to figure out unless you go really dissect it at this level. So I tried to create a full flowchart at the end to kind of show you how these things are connected to each other. But just to break the dryness of this whole video and the topic, I tried to pick up an example that's also within the standard. I just wanted to make sure that I don't have any proprietary information in these videos, just picked it from the standard. So this is also in one of the annexes. So basically, this is trying to show an example of, if your asset is a car headlight, or they call it headlamp. And how do you go about and analyze this thing? So basically, the overall system, you have a navigation. ECU stands for electronic control unit. So basically, you talk to any automotive person, whether they're making the cars or the suppliers, they usually use the term ECU, electronic control unit. So there's one in the navigation system, telematic. There's one gateway probably in the car that connects different systems within the car, maybe over an internal bus. And then for our benefit, we'll talk about also this one is a body control ECU, which is typically in cars. They divide the car, the architecture of the car is divided into different domains. Maybe a domain is just handling, motion, and that would be maybe the engine and transmission and all that. I don't want to go through all of them, but in this case, there's a domain that is body, and the body is everything around the car, which is maybe the mirrors, all the cameras, all the headlights, and things like that. So this would be controlled by this computer. So and then basically this computer gives a command to a power switch actuator to turn the light on and off. So okay, so going from the top, we say okay, the item is a headlight controlled by the body electronic control unit through a power switch. The body ECU, as I mentioned, talks to gateway ECU, this one here, which talks to the navigation system. So, and it also can be, this gateway can also be reached through what they call OBD dongle, which is it's a dongle that is typically can be connected from under the steering wheel or other places. And this is something that's required by law, so that any repair person, mechanic workshop, they can access the car and read diagnostics and stuff like that. This is required by law, but unfortunately, it's a big attack vector. It's always a place to look into and worry about. So anyway, these are basically showing all the ways that you can get access to this ECU here. And then next thing is this navigation control unit that can either be reached through cellular or Bluetooth. So as mentioned, the assets in this case could be this guy, the control unit. It could be all the internal buses that talk to each other in this particular domain. And it could be external communication channel that are here. And cybersecurity properties, for instance, that are mentioned here. Okay, if this is running some kind of firmware you want to keep the firmware secret. That's kind of more of a intellectual property protection. And integrity protected, meaning nobody downloads a new software or firmware on this thing. So if this is coming from a specific manufacturer, say General Motors or Mercedes, it's exactly the software that they intended to run on this particular computer. Excuse me. So the other properties are that these buses should be protected from anyone getting into the bus and changes the signal. So you can think about somebody connecting something here and sending signals to the bus. And the same thing for these. These should be basically encrypted and protected from eavesdropping. Now, moving forward, this basically defines the item and the asset and the cybersecurity properties. Moving forward to the next one, which is more towards threat model. So, what's the damage scenario? There's some damage scenarios that I listed here. The car cannot be driven at night because somebody turned off the light. So if the driver has no control or lights, they can't drive. So this is sort of a moderate financial operational impact. I guess if your light doesn't work, you maybe not don't leave the house, or you just get aside and don't drive. And so it's rather moderate. It's also, depends on your use case or the business person that tell you no, it's not, but that's just an example. The other thing is, or the car headlight all of a sudden go high beam or turn off while you're driving, say in the middle of high speed travel. And so you can imagine that this can be dangerous. This can, if you all of a sudden go high beam in front of someone, you can blind them, and you can run into you, or you all of a sudden lose light in a dangerous area. You may run off the road if it's a curvy mountainous road. So this has severe safety financial impact. So just an example of different damage scenarios uh, um, that have different impacts. So what are the threat scenarios? The threat scenario examples is, an attacker access this internal bus going through the navigation system. So they connect through the cellular system, go through navigation system to the gateway and inside the bus. And this is exactly how the Jeep hack happened. I think it was back in 2016. That's exactly how they got into the car through the remote system. And the attack path analysis is the way you say, okay, how are all these things happen, and how easy it is to make, and the easier an attack is, we say it's the more feasible it is, the more likely it is, and obviously the risk is higher. Obviously, it's something that requires, you go to break into a house, somebody's house, break into their car, break the lock, go inside, and put, say, this OBD dongle to do something. That obviously is a lot harder to do. It's a lot lower feasibility, and it's a lot lower risk. Even if somebody does some real serious damage, if they do that, the impact might be high, but the likelihood is low. So what's the attack path analysis in this case? It's like, okay, first I compromise the navigation cellular system, then from navigation system get to gateway, and so on and so forth. I explained all of this. So for each one of these, you can decide, you need to decide what the feasibility is. So as I mentioned, you have the damage scenario, which you decide what the impact is, safety, financial, operation, privacy of the user, and decide how bad the impact is. And then on the other hand, you have the threats, that are the vulnerabilities in the system, and you need a security guy to tell you, or an engineer who knows the system very well to tell you how easy or hard it is to do. So the risk would be impact times likelihood. And how you analyze this typically is done through this guy here. So you say, okay, on this axis, I have feasibility rating from very low, high, medium, high. So high feasibility means easy to do the attack. And impact, negligible, moderate, major, severe. So severe impact means it would be very bad if somebody could do it. So obviously you can see that something that has very severe impact and very easy to do, that's a very big risk. So that's how you kind of color code this. And this is something that you do as within the organization. You decide to give these a number. So this is a relative number from 1 to 5, and I decide, okay, 4 or 5 for me means very severe, severe risk, and 3 is high risk, and so on and so forth. And then the organization should have a risk management policy. Somebody at the top, say a CISO or head of product security, or someone with the executive decides that, and this is something that at the executive level has to be sponsored. That, okay, if I have a risk value of 4 or 5 that I arrive from my threat model, I said is critical, you all have to fix it within 48 hours. Or if it's high, you have to take maximum 2 weeks to fix it. So this would be basically the risk management policy that comes from the top in the organization and has to be enforced. This is usually not something that security people can enforce because it's something that's in the product that needs to be fixed. The security people would give you a design, would give you a recommendation, but it's usually within the product that needs to be fixed. So without this, honestly, threat modeling doesn't make any sense and doesn't have no value. So you have to have basically this behind your back to go forward, basically show that things need to be fixed. And so this is another visual that is very helpful. It's like, okay, I did my Tara, and based on this impact feasibility arrangement, I found maybe 5 risks that are in this category. They're high impact and high impact and high feasibility, and 3 over here, and so on and so forth. So you can kind of look at it, and obviously anything with high feasibility is bad. So the impact usually is something you cannot do anything about it. Say you lose steering on the car, impact is the same regardless of how good you design your system. If it happens, it's the same impact. It's a crash. So that's why it makes sense to try to reduce the feasibility, which is basically design the system better, design your controls stronger, and implement them well, and validate and make sure the controls are in place. So now I moved all of my risk from this high impact, high feasibility to something that is still the same impact, but a lot lower feasibility. So this tree that was here is moved over here. And this one here, I had 5 over here, I moved 2 over here and 2 over here. So I went from 6 to 8 and from 9 to 11. Hopefully I haven't confused you, but you just maybe rewind this video or maybe think about it a little bit, it becomes clear. But this is a very powerful tool. As a security leader, you can go to your executives and say, this is what my plan is, this is what I want to do based on the result of the Tara. And finally, come over here and the workflow. And this is supposed to sort of, like I told you, it's very difficult from the standard ISO21434, 21434, say, oh, how are things are related? So basically, first you create your items, you define their security properties, you define your damage scenarios. From damage scenario, you determine the impact for the damage scenario. From here, from the asset, again, you do a threat analysis. You look into your attack paths. You decide your attack feasibility, easy, hard to do. You come up with security control, how to deal with the threats, how to reduce the risks. So this comes from, what were my security properties? Didn't I need to keep something secret or away from tampering? That will decide what your control would be. From there, you come up with your requirements. and requirements, you go to your engineering and say you need to design it this way or you need to implement this way. You do the validation. Before getting here, so as I mentioned, from the attack you have a feasibility and you have an impact rating. That will decide your risk. It's basically that table that I showed you with red and orange colors. From there, you make a risk decision. So basically, going back here, I look at this and I say, what is my risk decision? Out of these five, which one is really important I want to take care of? So that would be your risk decisions, and from there, you make a set of claims when you send your products out in the world for people to use, and you define your cases. And if something is that you decided to retain, you decide to fix later, and so on, you deal with it in a risk register, which is you keep a register of the risk that you need to work over time. Hopefully, this shed some light on the overall threat modeling and the standard. And maybe in the future, I can talk a little bit more about how you do attack feasibility rating and impact rating. But I think this is quite a bit for now, and thank you.